Something happens when you hit 40 or beyond. John chapter 11, starting in verse 1, it says this, a man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. And Lazarus was sick. And you know, he was friends with Jesus. I kind of picture what that's like. I mean, because sometimes we picture Jesus, we picture somebody who's just like walked around with a lamb on his shoulders, a blue sash or something, and everyone knew he was Jesus. Because I picture more like, this is dating me a little bit, but like what's up, guys? That kind of picture, like he's like, oh, what's up? He's happy when Jesus comes to town. They're friends. They hang out. He would be the guy that Jesus would call if he had to move, but Jesus was kind of homeless. So if Lazarus had to move, he'd call Jesus, I guess. It would be the opposite way around. He's a guy with a truck. That's why I don't have a truck. I want a truck, but I'm already, most of you know I like to pick things up and put things down. And people, like if I had a truck, I would just be every weekend helping somebody move. I'm sorry, no. Of course, now I'm getting old and, it's harder to move stuff. Anyway, one of these days I've got a truck. But not with the current prices. Anyway, and so he was Jesus' friend, and he lives in a town called Bethany, which, I mean, most of us probably don't know all our biblical towns, or maybe you like the map part of the Bible. I remember I got my first Bible with maps in the back of it, and like every time something happened, I'd flip around to the back. I don't know why there was a map of the current United States, I think, in there too, maybe. I don't know. There was like something modern. I don't know. Maybe I'm just imagining this. I'll have to go find my old Bible. But, I love going to the back of the maps. You can kind of figure out where towns are. And so Bethany is sort of just outside Jerusalem. It would be the suburbs. And so if you live in Dover, I think like Magnolia. Like when I was a kid, Magnolia, there was like nothing there. It was just like farm fields. Some of you remember, you'd like ride around your bike forever and never see a house. Or if you broke down, in those days, if you broke down, you kind of had to use a phone, but there was no one nearby. You didn't have phones. I know it's hard for some of you to imagine. And so this is like, kind of Magnolia, or maybe like cabin in the woods outside of town. Or for those you had that, and, maybe Jesus relaxed there. It was kind of a place to stay out of the city, hospitable people. And again, I picture, I picture all the disciples hanging out with Jesus and kind of going in the refrigerator, eating all the stuff. They didn't have refrigerators then, but, they knew each other. And that's kind of important for the story, that they're friends. And so Mary and Martha, and now Mary and Martha are an interesting, they're two sisters of Lazarus, obviously. And you may remember a story before about Mary and Martha. Martha's like doing everything to help around to get prepared for people being there. And she kind of goes up to Jesus and she's like, hey, tell my sister to help. And Jesus is like, she's doing the better thing hanging out with me. And so, but they get along, but it's, they're the two sisters. So if you know that story, that's in Luke 10, so there you go. And so, there's this story, and then so it says this. This is the Mary who later poured expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick, so the two sisters sent a message, Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend is sick. And so poured perfume. Now, this is like John 12. If you were to kind of skip ahead here, we're not going to fully go through the passage, but the story is it's kind of like before the Passover celebration. They have dinner here. Now this is similar to the sinful woman in Luke 7, but not the same story. And so Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it. And the whole house is filled with perfume smell. And then Judas, he's like. He said, that perfume was worth a year's wages, should have been sold and the money given to the poor. And verse 6, though, says, not that he cared the poor, he was a thief. And since he was charging the disciples money, he was going to steal some of that. You know what I mean? And so he didn't care so much about them. He just cared about, he was going to take a little percentage of that. And Jesus says, hey, leave her alone. She did this in preparation. And so, they had this tight relationship. They're connected, and they send a message to Jesus. Now, why would they send a message to Jesus? It's because he healed people, right? Like if they knew him, they saw the stuff he's doing. He's healing people. He's sick. And if you've ever been in desperate need with somebody sick, you get like the best specialist you can, right? You don't just go, well, that doctor didn't work, maybe we'll just die. And so they're like, hey, I'm sure they exhausted the opportunities. He was sick, and so they send for Jesus, like, hey, Jesus heals people. Let's call him. It says this, but when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so the Son of Man will receive glory from this. So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. So it's kind of a funny story because Jesus often, he heals people. He's healed people from a distance. We've talked about that. And so, he's just kind of hangs around. And, maybe this doesn't surprise you if you heard the story, but if you're kind of reading through this story the first time, this is a little surprising. Like, it seems like, does Jesus not care? Like, what's his deal with delaying? And I kind of picture the messengers running back to say, oh, don't worry, he's going to die. Not going to die. But it's not quite, it says it will not end in death. He just kind of leaves there. And so Jesus doesn't come because ultimately he knows what's best. Now, as a parent, we often know what's best. My son and I were laughing the other day about a story that, they still remember. As a kid, I really wanted to eat like a tub of icing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to lick the spoon or whatever after a cake was iced. Anyone? Oh, some of you are like anti-sugar people. That's great. You've seen my Peep post. I love Peeps. If you don't like Peeps, don't throw them in the trash. Bring them in. I will gladly take them off your hands and into my mouth. But I remember as a kid, like, I wanted to eat the whole tub of icing, and I remember at some point as a teenager, I bought a whole tub of icing at a 7-Eleven, and I was like, finally. And then I got about halfway through it when I discovered this was not a good idea. And that did not get finished. Let's just say that. Because, parents know best sometimes. I remember as a teen, I wanted to stay out all night for prom because I thought that was a good idea. In retrospect, and as a parent, I realized not a good idea. And I remember like when the kids were little, if you know me, my kids, fortunately for them, have to do a lot of labor because, that's kind of the way I grew up. It's like you have to do work and, everyone else is playing video games, they're stacking wood. And when they're stacking wood, I would tell them, but, sometimes I remember this one time, I'm like, you're stacking it wrong. And they knew how to stack it right. They're like, oh, it'll be fine. Well, the whole thing fell over later. And I made them go out and restack it immediately. Now, I know that sounds terrible and mean, but it was like I knew better. But they weren't listening. And so, Jesus kind of, he knows things. He knows that what's the best for the situation, even though it seems to us like, dude, why are you waiting? But his disciples said, Rabbi, they said, only a few days ago, people, he says, hey, let's go back to Judea. And his disciples said, hey, Rabbi, only a few days ago, the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are we going there again? It's kind of like, hey, Jesus, I know you've had a lot on your mind, but remember, people were trying to kill us back there, so that's why we left. It's kind of picture, like the Matrix, Neo goes back for Morpheus, not a good idea, it seemed. I don't know, anyway. Or Return of the Jedi, if you will. There you go. He goes, anyway. Jesus replied, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, the people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there's danger of stumbling because there is no light. He said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, and now I will go and wake him up. And so Jesus has to be about things. And he doesn't have to worry about that. It says in verse 12, the disciples said, Lord, if he is sleeping, he will get better soon. They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. They're like, and if you've ever been really sick, and you're sleeping, what do you do? When your children are they're sick and they're sleeping, what do? You wake him up, right? No, you let him sleep, especially with a kid. You let him sleep. And this week I actually got sick on Monday. Don't worry, it wasn't COVID. Every time you get sick now, you feel like you have to okay. But I was feeling sick, and I slept all day, all night. Felt better, the next day because your body's repairing. And sometimes they even put people, those of you who work in the health, in like a medical coma. So the disciples are like, hey, if he's resting, let him sleep. But so he says to him plainly, Lazarus is dead. He kind of takes all the doubt out of that. Okay, you misunderstood what I was saying here. It says, and for your sakes, I'm glad I was there, for now you really believe. Come, let's go see him. And so Jesus is like, hey, let's wake him up. The disciples, let him sleep. Jesus, he's dead. I'm going to speak slowly and use small words for you here because you're not getting it, the disciples. And, it's easy sometimes to make fun of the disciples, but if we were there, we would have been the same way too. They're kind of not getting what Jesus is doing. And if you know the rest of the story, you know where Jesus is going with this. And Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go and die with Jesus. I love him. Thomas, he kind of gets this bad rap because he's doubting Thomas. He has this one bad day where he doubts, and forever he's doubting Thomas to it. But here he's the gung-ho friend who's ready to go die with Jesus. Everyone's got that one friend. Anyway, he's like, I'm in, let's go do it. He's got a Monster or Bang energy drink, and this dude he's heading in with it. So when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. So after 2 days, Jesus leaves, 2 days to get there. He's been dead for a bit now. And he'd already raised the dead, but kind of beyond 3 days, they thought, okay, you can't raise the dead after 3 days. It was a typical thing. This is actually, we're talking about it in men's Bible study on Saturday. He's not dead, he's mostly dead, a little Princess Bride there. So it was at 4 days, they thought, no way. Like he's dead. There's no mostly dead. There's no kind of coming back from this. There's no hope. This is beyond all hope. He's gone. And it says, Bethany was only a few miles down the road to Jerusalem. Many people had come to console Mary and Martha in their loss. And it'd be a big crowd. People came to them. I kind of wonder, because they seem to have money. I'm wondering if people came hey, what you doing with Lazarus's clothes? I don't know. I'm hoping for a little extra hair. And that's just the way I think. I always look at the selfish motives because people always got something going on. It says when Mary, or maybe they were just generous people and people came out. When Martha got the word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, and Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. That's a little accusatory, isn't it? If you could read that as well, if you had been here, but I kind of read it hey, we sent word. We know you didn't come. You had something more pressing than my brother dying. Lord, if you only been there, my brother wouldn't die. But even now I know that God will give you whatever ask. And Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. Yes, Martha said, he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. So common belief is there's this resurrection of the dead at the end of time. He doesn't correct Martha, which is probably a good thing, because sometimes when people are in the middle of their grief, it's not a good time to correct them, their theology. But he gives this powerful statement. He says in verse 25, he says, Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this, Martha? Resurrection isn't just an event. It is this person, Jesus. I am the resurrection and life. And she says, yes, Lord, she told him. I've always believed you're the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God. Then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, the teacher's here and wants to see you. So Mary immediately went out to meet him. Jesus stayed outside the village, the place where Martha met him. When the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her over there. It was kind of they were like, oh, back to the grave to mourn a little more. That was kind of a thing they did. And so when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd only been here, my brother would not have died. See, they say the same thing, right? There's a little bit of an accusation, I believe, there. And so if you'd only been here, Mary might have been thinking, you've eaten at my house. You know, I've listened to you teach. I've laughed through your jokes, even when they weren't that good. Like me. Where were you? And it says this in verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing at her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. Might surprise you, Jesus gets mad here. Where have you put him? He asked them. And they told him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. People who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him. But some said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Remember, he healed the man born blind. Couldn't he stop this? And Jesus wept. Now, our translation here says, then Jesus wept. Most translations, it's actually only 2 words, Jesus wept. And so a lot of people, if you've been in a youth group and you have to have one, I was a youth pastor for a long time, and you had to have one verse memorized or something. I mean, how many people use Jesus wept? Some of you be honest, because you were in my youth group. But it's like, this is a short verse, right? Jesus wept. And but it's often memorized for that reason. But it's short, but it's really powerful, isn't it? Jesus is God in the flesh. And he's moved. He cries. And he's not, some of us who are older remember like Mr. Spock, Star Trek. I know we got Star Wars people and Star Trek people, and I know sometimes they fight. I didn't know that until like later in life. I think you can appreciate both. And so he's not like this emotionless guy. He's not a robot. Jesus has real emotions and feelings. He's really human. And it says Jesus was still angry when he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. And again, this is typical. We'll talk about it on Easter as well. We talked about it in men's Bible study yesterday. It's like when you put someone in a tomb, you roll a stone up there because they decay, and it keeps animals and things out of there. I hate to be graphic. And then in the Jewish custom, then a year later, they come back, they gather the bones, and they put it in something called an ossuary. And you often see archaeological discoveries. They're like, oh, we found this ossuary. That's what it is. It's a bone box. And so he was in there doing what we do when we die. And Jesus said, roll the stone aside. But Martha, the dead man's sister, who, remember, she's the practical one. Like she kind of, she's the organizer. Some of you are that person, the person who organizes, does things, tells people what they need to remember. Hey, don't forget about this. Don't forget, he's dead in there. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been there 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Now, some of you know one of my favorite King James lines comes in this one. I don't normally read from the King James. I like it. But, Lord, by this time he stinketh. Egyptians use spices to preserve. Jewish people use spices to overcome the smell of things. And some of you with children, you'll find a bottle that you had missed in the car like a week later underneath the seat. Sometimes you're like, maybe I should just throw this out, because when you open it, it's the worst thing you've ever. Or if you ever had your sink plugged up and stuff in there for a day or so, it smells. Anyway. It's in the Bible. Verse 40. It is a longer story, but it's a good story. Lots of reading. But Jesus responded, didn't I tell that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven. Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so they will believe you sent me. Jesus is preaching in his prayer here. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told him, unwrap him and let him go. He does this, so they'll believe. Lazarus, it's interesting because I kind of wonder if the last thing, Lazarus said as he was kind of dying was like, Jesus, come help me. And then the next thing he hears is, Lazarus, come out. And I always think too, why does he shout Lazarus come out? And I'm thinking if he didn't shout Lazarus, would everyone come out? Because, graves were often used by multiple people. Don't think Walking Dead zombies. And I picture too, like Lazarus kind of like bound up in grave. I picture like, remember sack races as a kid? Like he's wrapped up like a mummy. He's like kind of hopping, wiggling out. And it's kind of can you imagine the surprise? This doesn't normally happen. This is not a normal thing. But he shows up. He comes out. And here's the thing. God doesn't always promise we won't suffer in life, right? Like we talk about that. We're real with that. Because sometimes people kind of want to tell you life's going to always be good and grand and everything's going to work out. Awesome, but not for the rest of us. Life can be hard. The girl you like doesn't like you back. The job you wanted, you don't get. Relationships you thought would last forever, don't. Friends you thought you would be there until the end, walk away. People we love die. God doesn't promise we won't suffer, but he promises it won't end this way. God doesn't have a pampering love. God has a perfecting love. We go through things that are hard sometimes in life. We go through things that are difficult, but God is still there. And ultimately, if you believe, even death is temporary. Even the end of life is just the beginning to new life. Lazarus, I don't know if you've thought about this. I always think about this. Lazarus dies a second time. He had a second funeral. Like, that's not a common thing, right? He dies. But even so, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. These 7 signs point to who Jesus is. And spoiler alert, the ultimate sign is really what happens on Easter. When Jesus comes back to life. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Jesus brings us hope when there is no hope. He brings us life when there is no life. He raises the dead. It can't get much bleaker than that. You've been through some hard times. I don't think any of you have been dead yet. But Jesus, again, he speaks life into that. For the disciples, this was a temporary illness. For Jesus, this is a temporary death. Jesus doesn't make things better. He gives life to people that are dead. Romans 6:23 says this. It says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord." We were dead, but Jesus offered us life, full life now, and eternal life with him.